My name is Mark Kuestner. We're in Manzanita, Oregon at my wife and my garden. We moved here about 4.5 years ago. It was a pretty standard suburban lot, so we tore a lot down and have been redoing it for the last 4.5 years. This year the dahlias are showing up very nicely. This happens to be Dahlia Thornset Furnace, very orange and fronted by an ornamental onion allium drumstick. And a little zap of color to the left is something called a 4 o'clock. I forget the botanical name for it, I'm afraid. And further over there's a silvery leaf thing that's a centaurea. It has a purple blossom which you can't see because it is in between blooming, but it shows nicely against the pineapple plant, which is called a eucomis, and the pineapple because the bloom looks like a pineapple starting to bloom out. More of the Thornset Furnace dahlia woven through it, and behind it you might be able to see some of the lilies beginning to bloom, again with another dahlia popping, the name of which I lost 4 years ago, but it's a dahlia backing on a foliage plant called a leptospermum, the silvery gray one, fronted by a sage, the purpley one just starting to bloom, called rockin' purple. That's an ornamental thistle called echinops, and I'm trying to get more silver to get contrast. And an exotic, if not sort of shockingly interesting one, is a kangaroo paw from Australia, and it's very drought tolerant and loves sun, so this is my hot sun area, which for gardening is kind of important. Hidden behind the Santolina is the city of Manzanita is repurposing their water meters covers, so they dump them in their building and many of us just take them. We're allowed to, and you can reverse it upside down and they become little trough planters, so you don't have to make your own hypertufa troughs, which is a fun thing to do, but this way you can highlight small plants that won't get overwhelmed and then killed by larger neighbors. So I have a lot of salvias in this garden. I like salvias. They're hard to kill, they have interesting foliage, and really many of them beautiful blooms. This one I like particularly for the silvery foliage. It's Salvia canariensis. Fairly hardy here and easy to reproduce. So and the hummingbirds love it. That's another big salvia thing. So this is the new center of the garden. It had a cardoon in it last year, which is a huge plant. This enabled me to redo it. There's a bird bath, which you may not be able to see, but the birds love that. And the hummingbirds like to go to that's a salvia black and blue. And behind it is a Clarkia, and to the left is a tall white blooming plant that's a valerian, which is an old medicinal herb plant, has an amazing scent as well. People will have seen this in nursery planters and hanging baskets. It's a lobelia. Basically, it's a potting lobelia, and they come in blue and many other colors. And I've discovered self-seed through the winter because I didn't plant that one. It just popped up, but it's a wonderful blue to offset a lot of other colors. So this is the second main entrance into the front garden. It's fronted by two more hypertufa troughs I alluded to. But I had made these years ago, again, for small plants that would get overwhelmed by neighbors. And another of the water meter covers planted up with another dahlia above it, the name lost many years ago, I'm afraid, backed by a white blooming phlox with what will be a Casablanca lily in front of it, and more of what they call hybrid poppies or the opium poppy, blooming pink. It's a lily Casablanca, and actually those huge ones are too, they're just much older. So beyond the bog salvia is a rather new introduction from the plant people in Artemisia. I think it's called Macana. Maybe not as hardy, but it has a gorgeous, fluffy, silvery gray and sort of offsets other plants. Like this one behind it, the Japanese umbrella pine, which has some strange Sciadopodis something or another botanical name. And that's backed by a Pittosporum, which has a beautiful variegation. They come in many different forms, but this one's a nice, I think it's Irene Patterson. This is one form of a Butylon, flowering maple, which is a very large family of plants with many different colors of these sort of almost dangling, beautiful flowers. And it can get quite large. It was about 12 feet last year, so I cut it to 3 feet, and it's now coming back and quite, again, hardy here on the Oregon coast and in Portland probably. Just this side of the elderberry is a germander, Teucrium fruticans, which is a wonderful silvery plant for structure, and it blooms beautiful light blue if you don't shear it, which I did. Above it again, the elderberry in that purple, and running up through it with the orange blossoms is a scarlet runner bean, which has wonderful tasty beans as well as having pretty blossoms. Which by chance match the mimulus, which is the orange flower on the bottom. So fronting on the germander, there's again the allium or onion drumstick in the back with more of the poppies. Going to another dahlia. Again, I forget the name, and I don't know if you can see the clematis behind the dahlia. We're in the middle of our sidewalk leading to our front door. In front of me is a Senecio angel wings, fairly new introduction to nurseries. I don't know if it blooms, but its primary interest is a silvery gray foliage, and it works in the ground, as you can see to the right, and in planters. That one's fronting on a Japanese holly, sky pencil, which hopefully will be 8 feet tall soon. Standing in front of our front porch with the Aphasia, I believe it's called spider web, of almost full shade tolerant plant that does have blooms, but it's mostly for the foliage people grow it. It's fronted by a lily that until a week ago was over in the corner, but we had a windstorm about a week ago and it snapped it to the base. So I borrowed a vase from my neighbor, and it's actually lasting longer than the lilies in the ground. So behind the poppies is a Tigridia pavonia. It's in the iris family and will open a bloom once a day. That will fade by nighttime and then it'll pop like this one from yesterday. And is just a gorgeous late summer bloomer. Just beyond the scarlet runner bean is a Arctostaphylos or Manzanita shrub. This one's St. Helen and will eventually reach 8 feet tall by 8 feet wide. They're native to the Northwest in California. And Manzanita means little apple in Spanish because they have fruits that are like little apples. And again, a very drought tolerant plant that doesn't want water or fertilizer. Very handy in a garden. This is a view of the Brugmansia, the orange flower, from a different angle. As you can see, it gets tall and blooms orange. There are other varieties that bloom other colors. To its right is a clematis, and to its left a New Zealand privet, whose botanical name I just forgot. In front is Obupleurum, which blooms somewhat like dill or fennel. Above to its left is an Azara upright form, which is a beautiful evergreen narrow shrub. In February has amazing scented, hard to see blooms, smells like vanilla cookies. To its left is the white flower is a Nicotiana, again, nicotine plant. And it's fronted by a silvery foliage plant, an Ozothamnus, which again is mostly grown for large silvery blooms or silvery foliage. And hidden in there is another Salvia mexicana limelight, which is just starting to bloom blue intermingled with the Nicotiana. So on the left, not flowering but with the silvery gray foliage, is the poppy. And then in front of it is the, again, pineapple plant, the eucomis with purple leaf. And this foliage to its right is a catmint, nepeta, that is more for bloom than for cats. Behind it is a vine called Lab Lab that should have a pretty bloom once it gets up. And there's a Halimium, which gets silvery foliage and beautiful, fun yellow blooms in March. To its right is a rose, nearly wild, I believe it's called, fronted by another eucomis, with mesembryanthemums all over. They'll open to be brilliant colors in about 2 hours. This is another, the kangaroo paws, Anazoganthus, I believe. The Cleome, which is a spider flower. Beautiful if it has spikes, so you don't want to pick it or you get pricked. Again, the lilies. This is a potentilla, gelida, which I grow for the silvery foliage, and I usually deadhead the minute I see the yellow because I don't like it. And the gentian sage, the blue, Salvia patens, a gorgeous hummingbird beloved plant. In this raised area, there's another Pittosporum, Daphnoides. Many of the Pittosporums have small leaves. This is a larger leafed one. And behind it is a eucalyptus, which will become a 30-foot tall tree. Beautiful glaucus, or that sort of gray-blue foliage. And to its left is another salvia. This one's Salvia mole poblano, because it's theoretically to bloom in a bright color. It's never bloomed. To its left is another Pittosporum, that sort of crinkly-leafed 12-foot thing. It's, I think, Pittosporum tenuifolium. Again, a foliage plant. Doesn't bloom much. It was 6 feet 3 years ago. So, fronting the Carokia is a small evergreen shrub, Chemocypris piscifera. It's called white pygmy, again because of the light foliage. Behind it is the tick seed, this big mass of ferny foliage with yellow blooms. I just forgot the name of it. I think it's Coreopsis, that's it. And behind, on here is a variegated nasturtium, the orangey yellow, more of the lily, going to the another Ozothamnus, fronting the bird bath, which they love, going to another of those little planters made from the water meter covers with various small bulbs and creeping plants. This is the base of the Chilean lantern tree, so named because it forms blooms that look like little lanterns that will open into a much brighter, slightly larger bloom. It's called Crinodendron hookerianum botanically. It forms from that bloom these fruits, evergreen, and is a is perfectly hardy here on the coast, though in Portland it might not be as happy. And next to the Chilean lantern tree is a phormium, this variegated sword leaf plant, large. Behind it, in a blue planter, is another senecio. That one's called Christobalensis and gets huge leaves. It's called red velvet plant because the underside of the leaves that you can't see are red velvety. It's surrounded by a canna variegated white Stuttgart. Behind, in its front, is another Lavatera. This is that pinky blooming one. I think it's called Burgundy. And in front of it is another Abutilon. This is more of a species than the one out front, with an unwieldy name, I think Mesopotamicum. And to its left is a fat, large-leafed rhododendron and below it, this is another Fatsia, like the one on the front porch, Japonica, and a cutting I took from the Hebe out front. And in here is another of those Salvia Mexicana limelights that I stuck in the ground, took.
Okay.
And below here, someone gave me an amaryllis for Christmas, and I read that you can just bring them back, so that will be here. And to its right is something called a lipstick plant, because this bloom will open to an amazingly bright red lipstick color. And I just forgot the botanical name of that too, sorry. And there's lady's mantle all over as well. That's a really nice plant for the coast. Okay, this is the area off of our front porch. In the center, there's an evergreen tree called Eucryphia restravor, and it blooms in August with scented white blossoms. And this is the first year it has bloomed, so it's a wonderful chance. Surrounded by a large bush fuchsia that was here when we moved in. I haven't done anything to it, so I just trim it as I have to. The hummingbirds love it here. Moving from the fuchsia, there's a blue hidden in there that's another sage, Salvia, Huntington Garden. And this is another of those Abutilons, Souvenir de Bonne, that we had one in a planter. And this shows how big they get, and they will grow orange blooms. It's growing through another evergreen shrub called a Leptospermum, again from Australia. And at the base of the Abutilon is another dianthus called Sweet Williams, a scented version of carnation.
Okay.
The pink is a variation of the same plant, and above it is another tall purple, another Lavatera, and a dahlia, the orangey yellow. And this foliage is a Jacob's ladder and a silvery shrub called a Lonicera. Bagson's silver, I believe. Lonicera is also the honeysuckle vine name, but this is a bush form that doesn't flower. More of the yellow chartreuse feverfew, leading to a pelargonium that is a sort of deep red scarlet. Partly for plant sales, I started propagating various plants, and since they were all canceled, I still have them. There is the Hoffman Center in Manzanita has a botanical garden called the Wonder Garden, and I volunteer there. So we're hopefully having a fundraising event in some safe way for people to buy some of the plants that are down there. So all of these are plants that are currently at that botanical garden. Sure, this is a planter full of things I overwintered because they're too frost tender to survive our winters. This is a relative of an African violet called Streptocarpella, many times an indoor plant, but it works fine in bright light, not too bright. Behind it is a Aeonium, I believe, called Zwartkop, and then this is another Aeonium that broke off, and I stuck it in about 3 weeks ago, and it apparently is surviving. So I will probably move this planter into the greenhouse again come November. This is my little partial greenhouse. It usually is empty in the summer because everything's out, but I've never been able to grow good tomatoes, so I thought this year I would put 2 cherry tomatoes in and see if I could use the greenhouse in the summertime for a change. They're at least fruiting. And it's stuffed to the gills in the wintertime with all sorts of things. And I have a little heater as well. This is one of my largest planters. I did a lot of cuttings, as I may have mentioned. This is a peppermint scented geranium. Amazing smell. Another of the Senecio cristobalensis that I took cuttings of that came. A particular red geranium that wintered over. And I took cuttings of one of the cistus plants out front, and it took. And this is, the variegated is another Abutilon, Souvenir de Bon, and it has orange blooms when it does bloom. And behind that, if you want a reality shot, that's my brush pile. Sorry.
No problem.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
And along above, I've strung more of the orange blooming scarlet runner beans, along with some peas slightly below. This is a horse watering trough that my wife gave me for my birthday 4 years ago. It has all potatoes and the various beans I just mentioned. So I'm waiting for the foliage to die down so I can harvest. Okay, in front of the Melianthus is an Acacia pravissima, another Australian that doesn't want water or fertilizer. It's a tree, so it'll get probably 12, 15 feet tall. At its base is a planter with a pelargonium in it, and which has a sort of grayish leaf, surrounded by mesembryanthemums, a South African cousin to portulaca that more people may know. And in front of it is an orange blooming Flavum glaucum, I think that's horn poppy, with various, there's a nepeta behind it, and that's culinary sage in front of it that I cut back. It blooms beautifully. This is the herb rue, which I like because it has a blue-green foliage. Coming up through it is a perennial geranium called Big Blue, I believe. And thyme next to it, and another of those weird dissected New Zealand plants, like the Carokia back in the back. It should get about 7 feet tall eventually. Someone gave me a marigold, and I'm not a snob in the garden. I like marigolds. More of the, I believe, Aeonium, like in the back planter. Ornamental onion, called, I think it's twist or swirl, because of the, and a geranium called, well, it's a perennial geranium, the Monster, that's its name, for some reason, I don't know. And then more of the ornamental oregano, and the hybrid poppy again. They came from seed all over, and I then moved them all over the garden. That's why they're everywhere. And I wanted to end up by thanking everyone for coming on this journey. I'm a gardener and love to show it. And in this pandemic, we don't get to show and talk gardens as much as I'd like.